Now, Baruuk was pitched to us as being this type of reluctant warrior. A warrior that... Wait, hold on a second, hold on. He's kind of a hard Warframe to make look good. Fashion isn't really his thing, so I'm going to make him look as good as I possibly can. So, there we go. Lazy Town Baruuk. Absolutely perfect. Mwah! And I won't hear otherwise from you guys. I don't care what you think. I'm running with this. Now, where was I? Baruuk is a Warframe that prefers the pacifist approach to combat. Until, of course, he gets pushed over the edge, loses restraint, and goes absolutely postal. Now, to get your hands on Baruuk, you're going to need reputation and standing with Vox Solaris. It's about 20,000 reputation in total, and his blueprints are bought off different tiers of reputation. Now, you will also need to get your hands on a decent amount of toroids, which are not really that hard to get now. I have a video on my channel on how to farm them pretty quickly if you wish to go and check that out. It's in this video's description. Now, Baruuk's whole ability set is based around evasion, damage mitigation, disarming enemies, but also sleeping large areas of enemies as well, before eventually punching and kicking them into the middle of next week, and he is bloody good at it. His damage mitigation is really nice, making him a very, very hard Warframe to kill, so if you enjoy that type of Warframe, then he will be perfect for you. So, just a very quick TLDR on how to use Baruuk before I go into more detail. His passive is his Restraint Meter, which is a resource used to power his ultimate. Casting Baruuk's first ability will make him evade incoming damage as long as he doesn't attack back. If he attacks back, then he will of course lose that evasion and start to take damage. This builds or drains his Restraint Meter, which you're going to want to do because you need it for his ultimate. When you cast his Lull, it will sleep large groups of enemies. You kind of see the mist dropping on the ground, and when enemies are inside it or step into it, they will slowly fall asleep. This also drains his Restraint Meter for every enemy that it affects. When you cast his third ability, it will gain the daggers, which is a defensive kind of shield around him from his desolate hands. More daggers equals more damage reduction. I think 90% is the damage cap, and each enemy then hit by a dagger will be disarmed and will also drain his Restraint Meter. So each of his first three abilities have a way to drain that restraint. Now, with enough restraint lost, when you're comfortable with what you have lost, you can go about casting his Serene Storm, which is his Exalted Fists, and go absolutely ham on enemies. So he's pretty simple. That's the kind of short version of what you will be doing with all of his abilities. Now, Serene Storm will stay active until that Restraint Meter goes back up again, or until it fills. But while it's active, if you keep sleeping targets and of course evading incoming damage with his first ability, while also disarming them with those daggers, you can stay in the Exalted mode for a very, very long time, because the Restraint Meter won't exactly fill up. You will keep draining it because you're using those first three abilities. So it's a constant restraint back and forth, building up the resource, use your ultimate until the Restraint Meter goes back to normal again, and then rinse and repeat. So that's, like I said, the very short version. Now, a little bit more detail. Baruuk's first ability is called Elude. This is where Baruuk will evade incoming damage from the front once he's not attacking enemies back. So to take no damage, you need to deal no damage. This kind of sounds silly, right? But it helps when you can just stop attacking an enemy if you're starting to take too much damage and basically survive that little bit longer. Now, Elude's effectiveness is increased with more range. It protects him from the front, but for a full 360 degree protection from that evasion, he needs to be modded for 200% ability range or more. So if you don't have the full 360 degree evasion, then there is always the chance that you could take damage from behind or from the sides. Now, each bit of damage that Baruuk evades with Elude will drain some of his Restraint Meter. But this ability also drains energy because it's a channeling ability, so you can turn it on and off whenever you need to. I don't leave it on all of the time, just when I kind of have a panic moment, because I find that his Desolate Hands gives me enough protection with adaptation as well. Now his next ability is called Lull. This is a mass gradual sleep, which is really good. It's one of those abilities that players will completely mod their Warframe around, or build their Baruuk completely around. You know, a complete crowd control build. It is affected by line of sight, however, so cast it maybe slightly in the air to stop boxes and things like that from blocking your line of sight, or cast it in an area that has full coverage of a certain room or a certain cross point. Now it gradually sleeps enemies for a very long time, but it also returns them to an unaware state when the sleep wears off, which will of course give you those stealth kills as well. Maybe a new leveling Warframe for you to try out. I'm not sure, I haven't tried it myself, so maybe it doesn't work at all. Sleep them and then build your stealth multiplier to gain more affinity. Now, like I said, Lull also builds up his restraint meter, or drains his restraint meter, for every enemy that you affect with that sleep. So more enemies you get, the more restraint you lose, which means you can activate that ultimate a lot quicker. So more range is definitely going to help that. Now his next ability is called Desolate Hands. This is where Baruuk will summon a protective shield of daggers that swirls around him, giving him damage reduction. The damage reduction cap is 90%, which can be reached pretty easily with I think 9 daggers. Apparently it works out at about 10% damage reduction per dagger, so you're not going to need a whole lot of power strength to gain that extra dagger, because at default you gain 8 of them, which is 80%. Now you will lose these daggers as they seek out enemies to disarm them, so keep an eye on how many you have active, because once you lose them, your damage reduction will go down as well. More power strength equals more daggers, and like I said, range will affect these daggers and make them seek enemies out from further away. But it is a recastable ability. Now this, combined with his elude ability, gives him some serious survivability, not to mention sleeping targets when you need to do that as well. And again, each enemy that is hit by one of those daggers will drain that restraint meter for you. Now, Baruuk's ultimate is called Serene Storm. This is his exalted fists, and I kind of wished they had have kept them originally named Depassi and Fist, so sad potato, they didn't do that. But maybe he wouldn't be taken seriously, I guess. Not that having a lampshade on his fucking head doesn't make him look serious. Now, with enough restraint lost, Baruuk can activate his ultimate. These Exalted Fists will send out waves of damage very similar to Exalted Blade, but they've got much more of a scope. They can hit much more enemies, the range on them. And they act kind of differently depending on which attack you're actually doing. So you can push enemies away, you can pull them towards you, you can levitate them for a second, or you can just vacuum them into one large group, like a big vortex. Now, normal attacks with Serene Storm will push enemies away, and the ragdoll is fucking glorious. Attacking them while using your default block key at the same time will pull enemies towards you and give you different attacks, and a slam attack will knock enemies away, but a slam attack while blocking creates this vortex effect, like I said, the vacuum, and groups enemies all up into one lump. Now if you decide to do a slide attack, it will lift enemies up into the air in a radius around you and kind of levitate them there for a second, which means you could probably launch them around the map if you connect with them correctly. Direct contact with the fists will disarm an enemy, if it has a gun of course. Not the waves that you send out, but direct contact with the fists themselves, with the business end of your Baruuk. Now he is incredibly well balanced when it comes to all of his abilities and how well they work together, but the delay in between activating his ultimate ability and it turning off again is a little bit annoying and could get you killed in certain circumstances, like maybe if you've got no energy from an energy drain Xmas around you, or if you're being swarmed by mods, because he does this small animation when you turn this ability on and also when you turn it off as well. But that's my only real gripe, that and the fact that he isn't really a pretty Warframe. He doesn't look great in my opinion, and he's quite hard to fashion frame as well. So that's pretty much Baruuk. Lazy Town Baruuk, the monk Warframe, the reluctant hero, and possibly one of my new favourite things in the game, just because of how well those abilities all work in tandem with one another. Of course, having the survivability in there tied with the crowd control is a huge fucking bonus as well. Now, I have 4 Forma currently on my Baruuk, and 3 separate builds that I have tried out, but I've kind of settled on only 2 of them, config A and config B, with config C being more of a work in progress. Now config A is my go-to setup right now, simply because it has a high amount of range, decent power strength as well, while also having okay duration, which isn't really needed anyway. But with this amount of range, I have the 360 degree evasion from his elude ability, while also having the ability to get as many enemies into that sleep as possible to drain his restraint as quick as I can. Now, Config B is all about his ultimate ability, dealing more damage and having a higher amount of daggers for a sustained damage reduction. Now, the only issue with having a high amount of range on any of your builds with Baruuk is the fact that you will lose those daggers from Desolate Hands a lot easier, which means your damage reduction is going to go down, so you're going to have to keep an eye on that, but you can recast the ability while it's active, so that's a really nice bonus. Adaptation on Baruuk is nice as well, simply because it's adaptation and it gives him additional damage reduction, so if you have that, stick it on. But when it comes to builds, chances are you're going to have your own setup to suit your own playstyle. Like I've said multiple times in the past, your Warframe, your game, your build, have fun, that's the main thing. Now, I would love to build my Baruuk for a negative range setup just for those daggers, based on having as much kind of damage reduction as possible for maybe like a solo run, in a way similar to Nova's Nullstar, having it with the 90% damage reduction as well. But negative range on Baruuk kind of goes against all of his other abilities, so it feels wrong, it just doesn't feel right, so I'm probably not going to do that. Now, let me know in the comment section below what you think of Baruuk, whether you like him or not, how many Forma you've put on him, and what kind of build you've settled on as well. Now, I think my fashion frame is on point. I will fight you if you disagree, and you can just jump headfirst into that feckin' badger pit. Do me a huge favour and hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, or don't if you didn't. Subscribe for more Warframe, and as always, thanks very much for watching.